Muito bom dia, bem-vindos a todos ao segundo dia do Congresso do Ensino Artístico Especializado. Antes de iniciarmos, algumas notas breves, especialmente para quem está aqui presencialmente. Portanto, o Congresso vai decorrer durante o dia de hoje em duas salas, aqui no A3 e no A2 ali fora. Nós aqui no A3 vamos ter os painéis de discussão, todos os painéis de discussão serão nesta sala. No A3, desculpem, nós estamos no A2. No A2 vamos ter os painéis de debate científico, no A3, que é o outro auditório, serão os painéis de discussão. Portanto, todos os debates científicos, todos os painéis de discussão. Tentaremos o máximo possível durante o dia manter os horários, especialmente o horário de término de cada sessão e de início da seguinte, para facilitar também a vida a quem está online, perceber onde está. E agora, sem mais delongas, vamos iniciar este nosso Keynote Speech do Congresso. Thank you very much, Philippe Dalarun, President of the European Music School Union. It was for us a great pleasure that Philippe is here, accepted to be here with us today. And so he will give us a panorama of what is going on in Europe regarding music schools. And I have to say this is nothing against dance schools, it's just we have to begin with one of the arts. Thank you very much, Philippe, and welcome.
Well, bom dia. Dear President, dear Executive Director, dear Rodrigo, dear colleagues from Portugal, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored and very pleased to participate in your second Congress on Specialized Artistic Education, and thank you very much for your invitation. By the way, Specialized Artistic Education is an expression that is rarely used in Europe. The term music education or art education is generally preferred, but indeed, specialized artistic education seems to be very clear and appropriate and makes sense. It is an expression which I know well, since we also use it in France. So, my name is Philippe Dalarun. I'm, as it has been said, a president of the European Music School Union, an organization that I will tell you about in detail. I'm also violinist, conductor, and director of the Conservatoire de Taverny with music and theater near Paris, and vice president of the Fédération Française de l'Enseignement Artistique, which gathers approximately 700 music and art schools in France. I will also say you a word about this. Through my European functions, I have visited almost all countries in Europe and discovered the richness and diversity of their music and art education systems, but I have never been to Portugal. So it is a double pleasure for me, on the one hand, to give you some information about the situation in Europe, and on the other hand, to discover your beautiful country, whose music and dance tradition is known and respected throughout the world. And it was great to hear yesterday one of your students playing so well the Élégie de Forêt, which shows the high quality of your teaching. As we have 1 hour ahead of us, I propose to share with you the following points. First, where do we come from? A brief history of music education in Europe, brief, very brief, I promise. But it's important for us to know where we come from and who we are in this big process. Second, I will talk to you about the diversity of music and art education in Europe. 3, an evolving sector, and it goes very, very fast. And 4, I will tell you some words about the European networks in the field of music and art education. So, where do we come from? One of the greatest challenges today for many music and art schools in Europe is to combine artistic requirements with openness to all. However, we still see places in Europe where the focus is only on artistic requirements, which often offers a decrease in students' number. This shows, of course, a very big interest for a certain form of quality, but it may be dangerous for these schools because today few funders, whether cities or states, accept to finance schools that are quite expensive for a limited audience. On the other hand, more and more music and art schools open their doors widely, develop collective teaching methods, which can be a real democratic progress. We can also see projects such as El Sistema. I'm sure you know El Sistema, an orchestra project from Venezuela. And those projects are developed in Europe in many places. The risk, when it is done without high quality standards, is a decrease in quality, which of course is also and can be a real big problem. So how and why did we get at this point? To try to explain it, I will take a very brief look back a few thousand years, briefly tracing the successive steps of music education in Europe. My approach will be, of course, a bit schematic, but my goal is to explain the big process of which we are part and the context in which we are developing our action today as music and art schools. You all know, of course, that the Greek philosopher and mathematicians of the 6th century before Christ, Pythagoras, made a link between sounds and numbers. For the Greek philosophers of that time, the observation of the physical laws was to lead to the guessing of divine intentions. The arts and sciences were part of this objective, and then music became a key to understand the world and a window on the gods. It is something that we can find throughout the Middle Ages with the theory of the harmony of the spheres, developed among others by the Roman and Christian philosopher Boethius, who describes this in his work De Institutione Musica. For him, there was the music of the words, the harmony of the spheres, then the human music, which means the harmony between the soul and the body, and then the instrumental music, what we call today simply music, which was for him and his time a representation of the universe and therefore an access to the Creator, to God. Therefore, general education in the Middle Ages, provided by the clerics, by the monks, classify the disciplines into two categories. The trivium, which included 3 literary topics, grammar, rhetoric, and dialectics, and the quadrivium that you can see here, which included 4 scientific topics, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music, as you can see maybe on this picture. So at these times, the first function of music, and therefore of music education, was the relation to the universe and to the divine, to the harmony of the spheres, as well as the harmony between human beings. This is also why Plato, in the 4th century before Christ, highly recommended music education for young people in his ideal city of his masterwork, The Republic. These Pythagorean notions were also to be found in the work of many composers later, much later, in particular Bach, with the use of the golden number, which some have detected in his work. Johann Sebastian Bach, who declared that he dedicated his work to the glory of God. It was 1,200 years after Boethius. Then, over the centuries, and in particular from the Renaissance, which placed man rather than God at the center, to the 18th century, le siècle des Lumières, music became an object in itself. At this time, you were educated in music to become a composer or a performer for the pleasure of the king or the prince. Remember that Mozart was still a servant of the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, and we all know that he was not very happy with this. Then Beethoven was maybe the first one to impose his music as the highest goal, music as the highest goal. And he dared to declare to Prince Lichnowsky, that you can see here, there will be thousands more princes like you, but there is only one Beethoven. Then, even if you can still compose now or play for the glory of God, maybe, or for a king or a prince, music itself became more important than God and princes. Therefore, it is not surprising that it was at this time that most of the greatest music institutions that we still know today in Europe were created, such as Paris Conservatory in 1795 or the Lisbon Conservatory in 1835, if my information is correct. And it is interesting to note the similarity of the two buildings, at least with the Parisian building of the time. As you know, we have now a very modern building. Depending on the country, these institutions replaced the music education provided by the clerics or royal academies, although some still exist today. In the 19th and 20th century, the aim of music education then became to train a musical elite, developing an extraordinary virtuosity. We all have in mind Liszt, Chopin, Paganini, and so on. This was an absolutely pyramid system which selected the best and eliminated the others. It is on this model, which still exists today, that our music schools in Europe have developed. But gradually, democracy imposed itself in Europe, which at first did not fundamentally question the music education system. But for the past 50 years, and even more for the past decade, European society has been facing new challenges: violence, terrorism, communitarism, populism, economic crisis, immigration, the question of citizenship, and at the same time, certain groups of people obtain new rights and recognition, such as people with disabilities. Then, the pressure from the politicians and from the society itself to address a wider audience, to include and not to exclude, is becoming increasingly strong for music education, which is perfectly legitimate and democratic, and which is also a great opportunity to reach more people, to be more recognized, and therefore maybe more financed, and to have a positive impact on society. But this is also a difficulty because it profoundly questions our school models and our pedagogical approaches. In addition, it destabilizes many music teachers who themselves have learned music according to an old pyramid model, which they appreciate, of course, because they have succeeded in it. We are at this point today in Europe, after this long historical, political, societal, and artistic evolution over the centuries. But of course, there is still a great diversity depending on the countries, which leads me to my second point, which is diversity of music and art education in Europe. Within the European Music School Union, we are used to work in regional groups. These groups of countries correspond to historical and geographical realities. Once again, my presentation is going to be a bit schematic because within a single country, you can find sometimes very different situations. However, from what I could observe, I can say the following. The Scandinavian countries favor in general the concept of art school and the complementarity of arts and disciplines opening to a large audience, sometimes from a very young age. For instance, Stockholm in Sweden, has a huge art school with almost 30,000 students. In Finland, which is more focused on music schools, 40% of the children, 40% of the whole population of the children from 0 to 6 years of age receive an early music education. Just think that from this 40%, some will become the politicians and the deciders of tomorrow, and it's so important that they add a music education. In Denmark, there is a close cooperation with primary schools in order to reach every child. So we can say, schematically, that Nordic countries have mainly a very democratic approach of music and art education, and at the same time, high standards of quality, like in Finland, for instance. Sorry, it's a bit dry, so. Now, the Germany countries have mainly music schools. They try to combine high level and access for all to music education. For example, the Swiss Association of Music Schools succeeded in having the right to music education for all enshrined in the Swiss constitution. This is the only country for now, and I hope not the last, but it's incredible that a National Association of Music Schools succeeded in enshrining this in the national constitution. In Germany, and at the same time in Switzerland, there is a specific program for gifted students. So, Music for All, specific program for gifted students. In Germany, there is a project so-called Jedem Kind sein Instrument, an instrument for each child, in cooperation with the schools. In Luxembourg, there is a project to make access to music schools free. In some places in Germany and Austria, there is music education for elderly people by music schools, and even for people with degenerative diseases. In Germany, there are also adapted music lessons for immigrants. Through these few examples, we can see that the social approach of music education is developing more and more. The Anglo-Saxon countries are a bit special, and unfortunately, they are no longer members of the EMU, a kind of Brexit, if you want. Music education is very different in the UK. There is no real network of music schools, and as a multicultural country, the issue of social integration through music is very strong and is mainly provided by general school. In addition, in UK, like in Ireland, and also in the Netherlands, which is not exactly the same region, there is less and less public funding for music schools, leading in Ireland to close many of them. In these countries, if you want to learn music deeper, you often need private lessons. The countries of Eastern Europe, belonging to the former communist bloc, have still a strong qualitative approach and quite a pyramidal system. Some, like the Czech Republic, have many art schools. Others, like Serbia, are more focused on music schools. But in these countries, the music and dance tradition is very strong, including within families. Think of a country like Hungary with its Kodály method, well known in Europe. Therefore, although the music education system is still rather pyramidal, the music culture is shared by the whole population. Finally, there is the group of Latin countries with quite diverse situation. In Italy, there are mainly music schools. The system is quite traditional. However, there are also projects like El Sistema, and the inclusion of disabled people is often remarkable. I had the opportunity to visit the music of Mirandola in Emilia-Romagna. Out of 1,000 students, more than 100 are disabled young people, remarkably well integrated. In Spain, the social approach is highly developed, based sometimes on group teaching and ensemble music. In France, we have a mixed system with a vast network of music schools and sometimes dance and theater. Some schools are still pyramidal, but the democratic approach is developing more and more. We often cooperate with school, and El Sistema projects are on the increase, such as Demos, which is a project in partnership with the Philharmonie de Paris. My school, for instance, has a partnership with Philharmonie de Paris to learn music to the youngsters in some poor neighborhoods. So in France, the notion of artistic and cultural education, I understand music and art education for all, is now complementary to the notion of specialized artistic teaching, and there is a kind of bridge between the two notions. Portugal is for sure in this Latin group, but you are going to teach me a lot about your country, and I already had very nice and interesting discussions with some of you, and I'm really looking forward to hear of you about your country, of course. As you can see, in many countries, there has been a strong evolution towards a more democratic and even social approach of music and art education over the last few decades. And there are several reasons for this. First, in recent years, research, particularly in the field of neuroscience, has shown the very positive impact of music and dance education on cognitive and social skills, but also on health and well-being. Not to say, of course, as artistic reasons. In addition, making music or dance with others requires listening, respect, and cooperation. These studies are more and more influencing public policies. Indeed, making music or dance has an impact in ways that other activities don't. Learning to play an instrument can be a great benefit to brain and body development, long-term memory, language skills, creativity, team spirit, cooperation with others. A lot of research in this field specifically studies the effect of music and dance on young children, but the effects are true at all stages of life. It's never too late. And this can be beneficial to adults and elderly people as well. Second, and probably mainly, our music and art schools have been strongly affected by financial issues. On the one hand, as I said, a city or a state is now reluctant to spend a big budget, especially because of individual tuition, for a small part of the population, usually 1 or 2%. On the other hand, the economic crisis, especially from 2008, have a big negative impact, and I'm sure you know that. I heard yesterday that you know that very well, unfortunately, in Portugal, have a big negative impact on our schools and the whole music sector in general. Finally, the growing problems in society and the powerlessness of politicians to find real solutions lead more and more to consider that culture and music and dance and art education on a large scale connect people, can be a benefit for society and maybe a part of the solution to help society to go better. So this leads to me to talk to you about the question of quality. It is therefore legitimate to ask what the quality of music education means in the light of this diversity and evolution. First, I would like to pay tribute to music, dance, and art teachers. In Europe, they generally have a high level of competence, an excellent command of their discipline, and for many of them, real pedagogical skills. Most of them have been trained in high-level European higher music institutions. I also want to add straight away that they have been heroic during the health crisis, as an EMU survey shows. I will come back later to this. But today, evaluation of quality, of course, applies to students, but maybe not only, maybe, of course, to teachers as well, if you are their employer. But evaluation is also about the whole music or art school project. From this point of view, I'm sure that we can say that quality is a goal we all share. But does a music school in Denmark have the same goals and quality standards as a school in Serbia? Does a school in Hungary have the same goals and quality standards as a school in France or Portugal? More than a result, which can be different according to the countries or even the schools, we could say that quality is a process. What project, vision, and mission for my school? In which local and national context am I? Which target groups in terms of audience do I want to reach? Which programs, method, and assessment do I need for my students? which qualification and skills for the teaching and administrative staff? Are my building and my budget in line with my project? How to find new resources? What kind of internal and external communication and decision process do I need? Which partnerships do I want to develop for which goals? If we ask all these questions and try to answer them, then I think that we can say for sure that we are on the way to quality. In 2017, 3 European networks, the Association Européenne des Conservatoires, I will talk a bit later about this, the European Music School Union, and the European Association for Music in School, have published a document entitled Standards for Pre-College Music Education. It's a kind of quality guide for pre-college, but in fact for any music school or even art school. It details all the points I have just mentioned, and you can find it on the EMU website. Maybe it would be interesting for you to have a look at it. Then, big question, of course, the question of funding. And finally, it's not possible to ignore the question of funding, which we are all confronted with. In Europe, most schools are financed by municipalities. However, in some countries, such as Serbia, the state pays teachers and directors, while the cities finance the buildings. Depending on the country, the regions may also be involved in the financing of music and art schools. And finally, I'm thinking of all the non-for-profit private schools which exist thanks to citizens, often volunteers, who try, and I know that you have many private schools here in Portugal, who try to develop a music education project in areas where the public authorities do not invest in the field of music or art education. But all states, regions, and municipalities have been affected to varying degrees by the economic crisis since 2008. As a result, as you know, many budgets have been cut, especially in the cultural sector, putting schools in difficulty and forcing them, in some cases, to engage in collective teaching, to increase fees for families, to remove sometimes disciplines, or even worse, to disappear. I just have a news today from France that a private school near Bordeaux is closed, and it's the same in many countries. This very bad situation is of course due to economic and financial difficulties, but also sometimes to a lack of coordination between public policies and school projects. If you consider that there are larger budgets for educational and social sectors, then it seems relevant to develop a project that is more or less in line with the expectation of the national, regional, and local authorities, and more generally with the evolution of society. Of course, it doesn't mean that we do not agree with high quality standards, but it means that in addition to our school models, we can find new ways to finance and to be financed and to be recognized. From this point of view, in addition, of course, to democratic considerations, specialized artistic teaching, which is so important to us, even from the point of view of quality, can be strengthened with an educational, social, and even health and well-being dimension. And it really makes sense in terms of the contribution that music and art education can make to society. As an example, you can see here a project of the city of Lyon in France, which uses its cultural strategy as a lever for a social inclusion. This is indeed a major challenge if we want to preserve the sustainability of our schools and continue to train the musicians and artists of tomorrow. I also invite you to look at but I'm sure you are already doing this, at the possibilities of European funding, which generally involves developing partnerships, and I know that some of you are already doing this. There are very interesting programs such as Erasmus Plus or Creative Europe, And it is interesting to know that Creative Europe, for example, has an increasing budget of 385 million euros in 2022, which is almost 100 million more than in 2021, in order to help the cultural sector hit by the COVID crisis. As a conclusion for this part, I would say, se vogliamo in italiano, se vogliamo che tutto rimanga com'è, bisogna che tutto cambi, says Tancredi at the end of Visconti's masterwork and Lampedusa's novel Il Gattopardo. And I let you think about this sentence regarding music and art education. Indeed, if we want everything to stay not as it is, but let's understand, if we want to save our music and art schools and the quality of our teaching and our values, then everything has to change. Let's understand, then we have to adapt. This leads me to my third point. An evolving sector. Indeed, our sector is in full evolution. All over Europe, music schools are confronted with hot topics which sometimes destabilize them, but also encourage to evolve. Once again, one of the main questions is the democratization of music and art education. Unless we take the risk of maybe disappearing, it's up to us to seize this opportunity and to evolve, in particular, on the following subjects, and I'm sure you are already dealing with this in Portugal. First, cooperation with schools seems to be a key issue because general school is the place of democracy. School concerns all children. I already mentioned Denmark, or the project Jedem Kind sein Instrument in Germany or in France. There are also big projects like orchestra at school or choir at school. We also have special teachers in France trained to teach music both at school and in music schools. I also mentioned the UK with music teaching directly in schools, and I could give you many more examples of cooperation between music schools and schools. When this kind of cooperation is successful, then the music school's position is strengthened as a resource and expertise center. So cooperation with schools is a democratic issue, of course, but it is also a strategic one. However, the problem is often the lack of training and skills of music teachers in order to teach groups of children in the context of a school class, which requires group pedagogy and creative approaches. I will come back later to this question of teachers' training. The other major issue in many European countries is inclusion. In a society that often excludes, music and art education is an exceptional means of integration. There are wonderful examples across Europe of music schools developing programs for people with disabilities, as well for elderly, including people with degenerative diseases, or for immigrants, as I said, and as I have seen in Germany, in Berlin, or in Stuttgart, for instance. The inclusion of adults in our schools is also increasingly common in Europe. It aims to strengthen the practice of amateurs and never forget that those adults are also voters. Of course, inclusion requires an adaptation of objectives, curricula, and teaching methods. Finally, depending on the country, gifted students are also considered to have special needs. I have mentioned the example of Switzerland, which has recently created specific detection and special curricula for talented students, and I could mention Nordic country, Austria, Serbia, and others as well. In most countries, another point, music and art education begins at the age of 5 or 6. But what happens if we start from the age of 3 months? Following the example of Finland, this issue is increasingly being discussed in Europe. We learn to walk, talk, feel, express ourselves in the first month and years of our lives. Why should it be different for music or dance. Indeed, it is important to develop ear, voice, rhythm, and movement from an early age. This requires adapted programs and specific skills for teachers, but the results are extraordinary. Children's artistic, cognitive, and social skills are enhanced, as well as the child-parent relationship and the parents' involvement in the art education process. And never forget that parents are also voters. In partnership with the AEC, the EMU is finalizing a guidebook written by the best European experts in the field to help develop early childhood music education anywhere in Europe. And when it's really finalized, I will send it to you, of course. The next point I want to mention is digitization, of course. As we all have experienced, digital tools have been brought to the forefront by the health crisis, including for music and art education, more difficult for dance, of course. In May 2020, the EMU carried out a survey, the only one for Europe, on the use of digital tools for distance learning during the first lockdown. The result was surprising. For a profession that is sometimes said to be a little conservative or uncomfortable with technology, it appeared that almost all music schools have maintained distance learning during this period. We asked, of course, much more questions, and it turned out that it was easier for individual instrumental lessons and theory disciplines than for vocal or instrumental ensemble music. But the fact remains, our teachers and directors, and also our students and families, have been responsible, creative, and resilient during this period. However, the use of digital tools during a health crisis, which required distance learning, should not be confused with the use of other digital tools in normal times. There are indeed many extremely creative tools in the field of ear training, sound or video editing, composition, music creation, and so on. This is what we should focus on in the future for music education. So we can say that this crisis has been a kind of accelerated digital training for music teachers. And today it seems impossible to ignore these tools, especially with the younger generations. And at the same time, digital technology must not invade us and overshadow the human aspect of music and art education, which is, of course, the most important. It is a tool, not a goal. And now teachers and directors training. Considering all these issues, it is impossible not to mention the crucial question of the training of teachers and directors of music and art schools. With the opening up to new audiences, the broadening of our schools' missions, such as cooperation with schools and inclusion, the use of digitization, and the diversification of pedagogies, it is becoming clear that training must also evolve. This is why several countries, maybe you, and also the EMU are reflecting on the profile of tomorrow's music and art teachers and the evolution of their training, including in higher music institutions. The EMU is working in close cooperation with other European networks on this issue, as on many others. And now I would like to tell you a word about different European networks. But again, some water, sorry. Over the past 50 years, networks have been developed in Europe to promote music and art education. Historically, it is mainly in the music sector that these organizations exist, but not only. Allow me to present the main ones, which are also our partners. So the first one is the European Music Council, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to the development and promotions of all types of music in Europe. It is a network that promotes and supports music-related activities for representatives of both national music councils and European networks involved in the fields of music education, creation, performance, participation, production, and heritage. It was founded in 1972 as a European regional group of the International Music Council, IMC, and it provides analysis of European policy developments and formulation of policy statements, as well as capacity building and knowledge exchange. In 2018, the EMC published an important document entitled European Agenda for Music. The aim in developing a European agenda for music is to bring together the diverse voices of the European music sector, to define a common vision and strategy for the future. In this agenda, there are 9 key topics. One of them is dedicated to education and access to music. Among the priorities we can find, ensure that access to music education is open to all. So let's think to what I said earlier, regardless of physical or intellectual ability, gender, age, cultural origin, geographical or economic circumstances. Second, guarantee sufficient and sustainable funding for music education, both in schools and in non-formal settings, such as music schools. Develop and maintain the quality of music education. Of course, it's only words, but it's also a document important to give to the politicians, to the founders, and the European Music Council is a big organization and is really heard in Europe. And it is an interesting document that you can find, of course, on their website. Then the International Music Council, IMC. The International Music Council was founded in 1949 at the request of the Director General of UNESCO, as a non-governmental advisory body to the Agency on Musical Matters. It is based at UNESCO headquarters in Paris and functions today independently as an official partner of UNESCO. And the International Music Council is dedicated to the promotion of the value of music in the lives of all people of the planet. IMC's mission is to develop sustainable music sectors on all continents, to create awareness about the value of music, and to uphold 5 basic music rights in all countries. The right for all children and adults to express themselves musically in all freedom, and as you know, it is not the case in all the countries. To learn musical languages and skills, to have access to musical involvement through participation, listening, creation, and information, and also the right for all musical artists to develop their artistry and to obtain fair recognition and fair remuneration for their work. I'm sure you will agree with this. It's also words and a document, but you can use it when you go and speak to your politicians or important people, as we saw yesterday. Then the Association Européenne des Conservatoires. AEC is the leading voice for higher music education in Europe. This network understands and supports music and arts education together with cultural participation as central contributors to quality in human life and inclusive societies founded on democratic values. As you can see, it is higher music education who is saying this. AEC sees music and art education as a quest for excellence in 3 areas: artistic practice, learning and teaching, research and innovation. It works for the advancement of higher education in the performing arts, primarily focusing on music. AEC is a strong partner of EMU. And on the initiative of AEC, there is also the music group. Just say music with a big M, a big Q, and a big E. Music, which means music quality enhancement, is a recognized European independent accreditation and external evaluation body for music contributing to the improvement of the quality of higher music education across Europe. So you will tell me, but this is only for higher music education. Not really. Music is able to involve in its board not only representatives of higher music education institutions, but also partners from the profession and the cultural sector, such as music schools, which employ higher education graduates, but also train students at pre-college level before they enter professional education, and reach out to society at large, from children to adults. The EMU has a seat on the Board of Music, fostering the dialogue between music schools and higher music education. But it is a body for the assessment of music institutions. Then, the European Association for Music in School, EAS. The European Association for Music in Schools interconnects all those involved in music education, teachers, educators, researchers, students, musicians, policymakers, to share knowledge and experience in practice and research, and to advocate for high-quality music education that is accessible to all young people, especially at school. These networks are especially dedicated to music and music education. Of course, there are many more in Europe and beyond, such as International Society for Music Education, Jeunesse Musicale Internationale, European League of Institutes of the Arts, European Chamber Music Teachers Associations, and also a European Association for Composers, and also others. And finally, I am pleased to introduce the European Music School Union, whose goals will become clearer to you from the presentation I have just made. The EMU is an umbrella organization which brings together 26 national associations. We accept only one association per country. These 26 national associations represent altogether more than 6,000 music and art schools in Europe, 150,000 professionals, and 4 million students, maybe more. Our office is in Berlin, and we are a member of the European Music Council. We have a seat in the board, and of the International Music Council, where I am an external auditor. We foster the quality and diversity of music education in Europe and its access to the largest audience, its promotion to the European and national institutions, the exchange of information, experience, and best practices between our members, the promotion of EMU regional groups, as you saw, the organization every year of a European Music Schools Forum. The last one took place in 2021 in Bordeaux and was entitled Music Schools at the Heart of European Society. The next one will take place in May in Luxembourg and will focus on the changing profile of music school teachers. We also organize capacity building seminars or webinars throughout Europe, especially on the hot topics and key questions I mentioned in my presentation. We foster the development of innovative pedagogical projects and the cooperation with partners I already mentioned in the field of higher music education, music in school, and university research at a European level, especially the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna, Austria. This university has developed a research unit on music schools and every 2 years organizes a symposium that brings together around 50 PhD researchers and music school practitioners, as we are. And we have a strong partnership with it. We publish also every 5 years statistics on music schools in Europe, the only ones that exist based on our members' data. Finally, we patronize youth music festivals, organized in partnership with our members. The next one, called Remix 22, will take place in Luxembourg from May 26 to 28, and it is organized by the Association des Écoles de Musique du Grand-Duché de Luxembourg. You can see on this picture a wonderful festival which took place in 2018 in Snake, which was with the Leeuwarden, capital of culture in the Netherlands. And it was a huge festival which gathered more than 8,000 youngsters from all over Europe singing, playing in an orchestra or an ensemble. And it was really festive and with big quality. And you can see that it's written Watergate, which has nothing to see with Richard Nixon and America. But this city is built, like many cities in the Netherlands, on water. And there is a place called Watergate. And what was incredible, the stage that you can see here was a stage on water. So it was a great moment of the EMU. So, to conclude, dear colleagues, I want to give you, despite the concerns and questions that we all have, despite the situation that the whole world is facing for now with the health crisis and maybe the security in Europe with Ukraine and Russia and so on, I would like to give you a message of optimism and hope. Optimism because we do a wonderful job, which is to transmit to our students a heritage of beauty and spirituality and to awaken them to artistic creativity and maybe to train the composers and the players of tomorrow and the dancers as well. And hope because thanks to our music and art schools, thanks to our teachers and directors, thanks to our students and families, thanks to your association as well as to all the regional, national and European networks, music and art education is progressing and moving forward in Europe with a very positive impact on society. Indeed, we built together here in Portugal and everywhere in Europe the music and dance schools of the 21st century. Our schools will be adapted according to local culture and the history of each one, but together we will promote music and art education in favor of a more democratic, fair and inclusive society. When I became president of the EMU, I realized what an incredible strength we have when we are united. I therefore congratulate warmly you on your initiatives, and I wish you a very successful Congress. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Philippe. The interesting thing is that hearing you, you really know what's going on in Portugal. So you have really touched on the key topics. This is a continuation of what the Secretary of State said yesterday. And we really did not know what you were going to say. And obviously, Philippe did not know what João Costa was going to say. So we are right and a little bit tight on schedule, but still we will open the floor for one or two questions from the audience. Please keep your questions short. If you have. The first one is the most difficult one, but today it will be the only one. And since nobody is raising their hands, I will put you what is something that has been in the room. And so it's this thing about specialized education for some and a more inclusive and democratic approach. If you could just give us one or two extra thoughts on how to balance inclusion of all and quality in the outcome of the teaching.
Yeah, for sure. I can give you an example from my country, and maybe my music school as well. If we look maybe 2, 3, 5 years before, there was a big fight in France between specialized artistic education and, as I said, artistic and cultural education for all. Because music and art schools were afraid that the money would go to this area, to this project of music in school and inclusion. And it was more or less the case in some places. But then we reflected and we thought, well, in a way, we are fully complementary. And why not have a larger audience? This will be good for our music schools. And we have a kind of expertise. We know how to teach music, even if we have to train to new pedagogies. But we are, as I said, centers for resource and expertise. And so we started to dialogue before anything else. Dialogue is so important, and I saw yesterday that you have a dialogue that I never saw in any other country with your politician authorities. You could ask questions and he answered, even in Portuguese, and even if I couldn't understand everything. But I saw the quality of your dialogue, and this is quite rare. And I just encourage you to continue, but I'm sure you will do it without my opinion. So it is important to have this dialogue between music for all and specialized artistic education, and not to be and not to be fighting with them. So, as I said, if we have a larger audience, it's not that we will give up to our values, to the quality of music education. It is just that we will be more recognized, more well-known, and it's up to us to seize this opportunity. So it is the deal today in Europe, and the situation in Portugal is the same that in many other countries. So for me, this is the way to engage in this dialogue, to be sure of our values, but also to be ready in a way to move a little bit, to adapt a little bit our curricula, our pedagogies, maybe with digitization a little bit, not that much, maybe with the question of inclusion, and mainly, in my opinion, with the question of music in schools. I know that you have a special situation here with the schools, which is a great opportunity for you, and it is not the case in all the countries. But when you create this partnership, especially with the schools, but not only, you are walking a step forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will now have a short break, and at 10:15 we'll begin the next sessions. Thank you all.